So, Professor Diagne, in the moment you are in Cambridge as a fellow, and you had an obligation as a fellow which made it impossible to join us in person, but we are very happy that you made it possible to participate and to give your lecture and to be present for questions and answers afterwards for online. So thank you very much. I will present you, I have the honor to present you, and as we are not in a hurry today, which is a very delighting situation normally in conferences. So I have the honor to present you a little bit longer. I will do this in German, and you received already your presentation, the presentation of your person in English, so you know what I am talking about, and I hope it's not a fault. Ja, ich freue mich sehr, Professor Diagne hier einführen zu dürfen und kann dies in etwas ausführlicherer Zeit tun, weil wir ja diese Zeit haben und gemeinsam gleich nach seinem Referat auch noch ins Gespräch kommen werden. Professor Diagne muss danach zu einer Veranstaltung in Cambridge, deswegen ist er sozusagen online hier, aber das hat günstigerweise haben wir auch noch Sommerzeit, sodass sich die Zeitverschiebung mit dem Termin perfekt gefügt hat. Sie könnten übrigens, wenn Sie das möchten, einen kurzen Aufschlag dieses Vortrages, wenn Sie mit dem Englischen nicht ganz so sicher sind. Es wird gleich der Herr Flack herumgehen. Es gibt 20 Exemplare, wenn Sie dem folgen möchten. Es ist nicht der vollkommene Vortrag. Nur wenn Sie das brauchen, dann ist das gleich möglich. Aber meine Anmoderation verstehen Sie, glaube ich, sehr gut. Réinventer l'universel, so überschreibt der Philosoph Souleymane Diagne das erste Kapitel seines jüngsten Buches, das die Universalität im Titel trägt. Interessanterweise ist die Universalität als Verb universaliser formuliert, womit bereits viel anklingt, was für Souleymane Diagnes Verständnis von Universalität wichtig sein wird. Man kann die Leitlinie seines Denkens mit einem Zitat von Alioune Diop, dem senegalesischen Schriftsteller, Gründer der wichtigen Kulturzeitschrift Présence Afrique und Inspirator eines wirklich weltkirchlichen Verständnisses auf dem Zweiten Vatikanischen Konzil wiedergeben. Diop schreibt oder sagte damals: Désoccidentaliser pour universaliser, tel est notre souhait. Pour universaliser, il importe que tout soit présent dans l'œuvre créatrice de l'humanité. Also entwestlichen, um zu universalisieren, das ist unser Wunsch. Damit man universalisiert, ist es wichtig, dass alle gegenwärtig präsent sind im kreativen Werk der ganzen Menschheit. Zum einen nimmt Diagne die Aufgabe eines postkolonialen Denkens als Dezentrierung eines über seine Partikularität unaufgeklärten Eurozentrismus wirklich ernst. Zugleich betont er, dass Dekolonisierung und Universalisierung keine Gegensätze sind und grenzt sich kritisch gegen die Behauptung einer unvergleichbaren Differenz der Kulturen ab. So zeigt das Zitat, was Sie gerade gehört haben, mit diesem Œuvre créatrice de l'humanité, die zutiefst humanistische Grundanliegen, Grundausrichtung Diagnes. Und es kommt, dieses Œuvre créatrice de l'humanité von Diop, kommt im Untertitel seines Buches wieder vor, nämlich das Universalisé heißt auch l'humanité par les moyens de l'humanité, die Menschheit mit dem Mittel der Menschheit. Die Aussage von Diop ist ein Zitat aus seiner Antrittsrede bei der Eröffnung des, ich zitiere, so hieß er damals, Zweiten Kongresses der schwarzen Schriftsteller und Künstler in Rom 1959. Es ist also definitiv kein modisches, neues Thema. Und so bezeichnet das Thema der Universalität auch bei Diagne einerseits eine aktuelle Beschäftigung, andererseits kann man es wirklich auch als ein Lebensthema bezeichnen. Ein im breiteren Sinne aktuelles Thema, denn der Anlass, sich mit dem Thema Universalität konkret auseinanderzusetzen, ist der Wechsel 2008 an die Columbia University in Harlem von der Diagne in seinen sehr lesenswerten Memoiren schreibt: Si le postcolonial était une religion, Columbia en serait le premier temple. Also wenn die Postkolonialität eine Religion wäre, wäre Columbia der erste Tempel, der vorrangige Tempel. Als Diagne relativ bald nach diesem Wechsel an Columbia selbst einer offensiven Kritik als afrocentrist orientalisé, also als ein sozusagen auf Afrika zentrierter und orientalisierter bezeichnet wird, wird klar, dass er sich mit der Problematik von postkolonialer Kritik und Universalität auseinandersetzen muss. Und es ist charakteristisch für ihn und sehr sympathisch, dass er mit dem Autor dieser Kritik einige Jahre später gemeinsam ein Gesprächsband herausgibt, Enquête d'Afrique, Universalisme et Pensée décoloniale. Also im Ringen um Afrika, um Erringen Afrikas oder der Afrikas, es ist mit Plural auch geschrieben, Universalismus und dekoloniales Denken, postkoloniales Denken. Diagne hat eine Gabe, eine wirkliche Gabe, auch scharfe Kritiker in ein Gespräch zu verwickeln. So hat er auch ein Gesprächsband mit dem durchaus als islamkritisch zu bezeichnenden Medievisten und Philosophen Remy Braque herausgegeben. Wenn Sie also gleich kritische Fragen stellen, seien Sie gewarnt. Aber das aktuelle Thema Columbia ist auch ein Lebensthema. Diagne darf sich selbst als Kind, Enfant de Saint-Louis, also Kind von Saint-Louis, bezeichnen. Diese Stadt im Norden Senegals vereint die Paradoxie, dass ihr Name sehr deutlich die Problematik eines französischen Universalanspruches verkörpert, König Ludwig im Norden Senegals. Zugleich aber steht die Stadt für eine lebendige Métissage der Traditionen Westafrikas, des Arabischen und des Französischen, wie übrigens auch von Christentum und Islam. In der Autobiografie berichtet Diagne, dass die 1847 errichtete Hauptmoschee von Saint-Louis wahrscheinlich weltweit die einzige Moschee mit 2 Minaretten ist, von denen eines ein Glockenturm mit einer Uhr ist. Sind so Gegenwart und frühe Kindheit benannt, so muss man zur Vorstellung und zur Vollständigkeit noch ganz schnell den Rest des Lebens erzählen. Und ich folge hier Diagnes eigener Struktur, der nämlich seine Autobiografie in Städtenamen aufgliedert. Ziguinchor im Süden Senegals, südlich von dem Einschub von Gambia, seine frühe Schulzeit an einer katholischen Schule. Dakar, die Stadt der Jugend, des Baccalaureats und der ersten Begegnung mit Leopold Senghor, dem berühmten Dichter, Schriftsteller, Philosophen und Staatspräsidenten, anlässlich eines Prix de l'Humanité, den Diagne errungen hat, und zwar interessanterweise in Kenntnis des Griechischen und Lateinischen. Dann Paris, Lycée, Studien an der École Nationale Supérieure bei Althusserl und im Umfeld von Derrida. Dann anlässlich eines Studienaufenthaltes in Harvard intensive Studien des amerikanischen Pragmatismus, unter anderem bei Hilary Putnam, und die Entdeckung der Sprache der formalen Logik. Er hat promoviert für einen später postkolonialen Denker, wenn man das so sagen darf, ungewöhnlich über die formale Logik bei George Boole, eines britischen Logiker des 19. Jahrhunderts. Dies führt ihn zur Wissenschaftsgeschichte, die er 1982 bis 2002 in Dakar lehrt. Die Einbettung der Philosophie in soziale Kontexte ist ihm wichtig und wird auch ganz praktisch. Diagne ist Berater von Präsident Abdou Diouf im Erziehungsministerium längere Zeit gewesen. Seine in Dakar schon einsetzende Auseinandersetzung mit der islamischen Philosophie wird 2002 verstärkt, nachdem er einen Ruf nach Chicago an das Institute for African Studies in Evanston annimmt. Und zwar 2002, Sie erinnern sich, nach 9/11 Seminare über islamische Philosophie und Mystik mit dem Ziel, ich zitiere ihn wieder, de présenter aux étudiants l'islam comme une tradition intellectuelle et spirituelle où l'on questionne, où l'on discute, où l'on doute, où l'on examine, où l'on interprète. Also den Studenten den Islam als eine intellektuelle, geistige Tradition und spirituelle Tradition zu präsentieren, wo man fragt, wo man diskutiert, wo man zweifelt, wo man untersucht, wo man interpretiert. Charakteristisch für Diagne ist, dass er die Tradition des kulturellen Brückenbaus, für die die Fortschreibung der Antike in der arabischen Kultur steht, selbst praktiziert und den indischen Philosophen Muhammad Iqbal mit seinem Zeitgenossen Omri Boehm zusammenhält in einer schönen Publikation. Ich komme zum Ende. So ist dies vielleicht das Charakteristikum Diagnes. Er glaubt zutiefst an die geistige Kraft und das humanistische Erbe der Translatio Studii, die sich der Mühe, aber auch dem geistigen Abenteuer des Übersetzens stellt und die nicht allein der griechisch-römischen Antike gehört, sondern ein Paradigma für den kreativen Geist der ganzen Menschheit darstellt. Und so formuliert Diagne in dem Buch über das Übersetzen de langue à langue, l'hospitalité de la traduction, also von der Sprache zur Sprache, die Gastfreundschaft der Übersetzung, eine programmatische Aussage, die auch als Schlusswort der Vorstellung und als Übergang gelten kann, um dem geistigen Brückenbauer selbst das Wort zu geben. Au modèle relativiste et séparatiste d'une décolonisation de la pensée, j'oppose un modèle traductif, parce que les langues ne nous enferment pas dans les philosophies grammaticales incommensurables. Les philosophes en général, les philosophes africains en particulier, pensera en traducteur de langue à langue. Dem relativistischen und separatistischen Modell einer Dekolonisierung des Denkens setze ich ein Übersetzungsmodell entgegen, weil die Sprachen uns nicht einschließen in grammatische, unvergleichbare Philosophien, sondern der Philosoph im Allgemeinen, der afrikanische Philosoph im Besonderen, wird denken als Übersetzer von Sprache zu Sprache. Herzlichen Dank und a warm welcome again to you, Professor Diagne. The floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much. Hopefully you are hearing me well. Great. I will begin by expressing my regrets for having to participate only remotely to this. I had planned with great enthusiasm to be with you in person, but I have to be in Cambridge, where I am currently a visiting fellow, as Professor Specker has just explained now. After these words of regret, I would like to thank you, Professor Specker, from the bottom of my heart. First of all, for the invitation. It is an honor to be part of this meeting. And then after I had to change my plans, you allowed me to still participate by video conference, and I am very grateful for that as well. Third, I must thank you for having suggested that I want to contribute to our conference on universality from the perspective of Islamic philosophy. This was the suggestion of someone who has known my work, as you have just demonstrated by this generous presentation and introduction. And I have gladly accepted the suggestion. So I will be talking about just that, universality from the perspective of Islamic philosophy. But before I focus on universalism in the works of just a few figures that are representative of Islamic philosophy, I want to talk about the religion, to talk about Islam itself as aiming for universality as opposed to tribalism and tribal law. The reason for that is it is important to start with the universalism of the Islamic faith, the Islamic religion itself, to manifest that the Muslim philosophers I'm going to evoke in a second part of my presentation, have embraced a universality that was present in their religion itself. In other words, you mentioned my discussion with Remy Bragg and the book of dialogue, a disputatio, as you would say in Latin, that we had. Precisely, that was one of the points that was raised, the idea that, yes, Muslim philosophers are universalist, all right, but their religion is not. So Islam and the universal would be one point I want to consider first. By just mentioning in what sense the religion, the Islamic faith, corresponds to what French philosopher Henri Bergson has called a dynamic religion. He has this category of the dynamic religion versus the closed and static one. And the way in which he talks about a dynamic religion does correspond to the way in which the Islamic faith was born as a movement away from the tribe towards humanity. As we know, the last book published, not posthumously, published by himself, by Henri Bergson, The Two Sources of Morality and Religion, showed that the movement of humanity with the driving force of religion is to move away from tribalism, from tribes, towards human society. This movement can be seen in the story of the dawn of Islam, in particular in the story known in Muslim narratives of early Islam as the story of the Pact of Chivalry. That is how it is known. This is briefly a pact by which a group of young Meccans, including among them the future Prophet Muhammad. I say the future Prophet Muhammad because at that point he had not yet received his mission with the revelation of the Quran. He was just a Meccan among other Meccans, highly respected by in his society, and which gained him the respect, which gained him the nickname of Al-Amin, the one, the trustful one. So these young Meccans committed themselves against tribal law. This was a new phenomenon in the society of Mecca at that time, when these younger generation, these young people, committed themselves against tribal law because they wanted to defend a universal idea of justice, in particular for the protection of the weak. Because the word of tribes is one of war of all against all, tribal law is based on force. The power of a tribe is measured by the number of men that it can arm. And this explains, by the way, the low value that was placed on women, who can nevertheless play a role when it comes to sealing alliances that will strengthen the tribes that bind themselves together. It is in Islamic narrative about the birth of the Muslim faith, that is how pre-Islamic Arabia, and in particular Mecca, is described. So according to the narrative I am evoking, a man who had come to Mecca had fallen victim to the bad faith of a powerful resident of the city, who simply refused to pay him after having taken his merchandise. So this is a man who came to do some trade, commerce in Mecca, and this powerful Meccan took advantage of him. Powerful because he belonged to a powerful tribe, of course. So what could a foreign merchant, alone and from one of the most opposed to one of the most powerful clans in Mecca, do in a situation like that? But insists the story, his cries for justice were heard by the youth of Mecca. These young people was just revolted by the injustice as they saw it, and they came together, regardless of their different tribal affiliations, to demand, and successfully, that the merchant receive what was owed to him. Beyond that, beyond the simple fact of making sure that this foreigner, this stranger who came to Mecca to do commerce, had been treated fairly, the group remained united as they swore an oath, and they did that by pouring water onto the black stone of the Kaaba, of the cube of Mecca, and they drank the water that they poured on the black stone, one after the other. They drank it in turn. This was a way of swearing together to serve a form of universal justice that was breaking away from tribal law, so to say. So it is not only the presence of the future prophet of Islam at this chivalric pact that is important here. What is important is a comment he made much, much later, many years later, when Islam was now a religion, about this event, when he declared about this pact of chivalry, I quote, "I was present at this excellent pact, and I would not exchange my part in it for a herd of red camels." And he added, "And if today in Islam I were called upon to honor this pact, I would respond with joy." End of quote. What this later comment tells us, and this is why I'm recalling this story, but this comment tells us is that Islam is nothing other than that pact, is nothing other than the commandment to honor this pact, to leave behind tribal law and embrace a form of universal justice and a new form of human bonds that are not the bonds of tribes, that are not real bonds, because tribalism fragments humanity. History dictated that instead of a revolution, actually this young generation coming together, this youth coming together and swearing this pact of allegiance to a higher idea of justice, this could have been the beginning of a social revolution against tribal law. But somehow history dictated that instead of a revolution, of a social revolution, it became a religion that marked a continuous departure from the religions in the plural of fathers and tribes, and a move towards a religion of humanity. It was this meaning of religion that the Prophet of Islam revealed to his companions afterwards, when after the important event that was the hijrah, the decision to flee from Mecca and to flee the persecution and seek refuge in the city of Yathrib, which became Medina to Nabi, the city of the Prophet in honor of Prophet Muhammad. So after the Hijrah, after the Muslim faith had found refuge in the city of Medina, the Quranic message replaced tribal affiliations. And he chose to name his companions, the nascent community, the Ummah, using two new names. One, the name of emigrants, Muhajirun, meaning those who had to flee Mecca and seek refuge in Medina, and defenders, the Ansar, those who had welcomed the emigrants in their own city of Yathrib, which they renamed Medina, as I said. So it is important. This is very important because somehow asking the community to be called either Muhajirun or Ansar was a way of superseding, so to say, tribal affiliation and replacing them by function. In a way, one would define by the function he or she played in the birth of the religion rather than their tribal affiliation. This new form was of brotherhood and sisterhood, of fraternity, was established between the Ansar and the Muhajirun, and this bond was meant to be stronger than any kind of biological or tribal ties. You see why I evoked a French philosopher, Omri Boehm, and his notion in his book, The Two Sources of Morality and Religion, in the sense that humanity, although it could seem an abstraction, the tribe doesn't need anything other than instinct. As Bergson say, we have a tribe, an instinct for our tribal appurtenance. We belong to our tribe, and we have instinctively this connection with people who look like us, who share with us the same biological origin, etc., etc. There is not such a thing as an instinct for humanity, and humanity can appear as an abstraction. But, says Bergson, still we can get a sense of humanity in two different ways. One, and convergent. One is philosophical reason, he says. The other one is religion. And as Bergson said, religion is much more powerful when it comes to convincing us that there is such a thing as humanity, because the register of religion is emotion, and it just can develop and as fire, he says, comparing it to fire. I mention this because this has been my reading precisely of Islamic philosophy, and Professor Specker has been kind enough to mention the book I have devoted to the Indian philosopher Muhammad Iqbal. The book I have written on Muhammad Iqbal's thought is precisely titled The Open Society, an expression coming from Bergson, Islam and Fidelity in the Thought of Muhammad Iqbal. This seemed to me a point that was important to make before I start talking more precisely about Islamic philosophy. And I wanted to conclude on this point of the recreation, the creation of a community that is beyond tribalism. I want to stress the importance of the following saying by the Prophet, the following hadith as it is called. I quote, "He who calls for tribalism is not one of us. He who fights in the name of tribalism is not one of us. He who dies for tribalism is not one of us." This is one of the widely accepted prophetic hadith that is quoted, that can be quoted in Islam. But having said that, the tribal spirit is resilient. And if I look at the history, the early history of Islam, that tribal spirit was reborn as soon as the Prophet passed away. That tribal spirit was at the root of the dissensions and the internal wars that ended the reign of those known as the four rightly guided caliph of Islam, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. So the restoration by the Umayyad caliph who followed those four caliph, based on the principle of dynastic succession that made it appearance in the Islamic world, marked a strong comeback of the tribe. And even today, the dialectic between the open and the closed, the universal and the tribal, the tribe and humanity is at work in the word of Islam. This has been a continuous dialectic in the word of Islam. It is in light of this expression of a dialectic between the universal and the tribal that I now consider the continuous reinvention of Islamic universality in Islamic philosophy. We are talking about a philosophy born of translation against a spirit of closedness. And translation, insisting on translation, on the fact that this philosophy was born out of translation, is important. There was this movement of translation of Greek philosophy, but there was also a resistance to that. Again, this dialectic of the open and the closed. The movement of translation ended winning with the support of enlightened Abbasid Caliph, usually the Caliph who is most cited when it comes to openness to Greek philosophy and the translation of Greek philosophy into Arabic is the Abbasid Caliph Al-Mamun, who died in 832 and who has created this famous Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, which was an institution devoted precisely to translation, where were hosted translators, people who would copy manuscripts, etc., everything that is needed for a culture of translation, which was really in the spirit not of tribal closedness, but of openness and universality, the spirit expressed by hadiths that were precisely quoted at length at that time by people who wanted that openness to Greek philosophy, because the resistance would say, why would we be interested in the love of wisdom, in the so-called love of wisdom, of people who are just a pagan, who did not know revelation and who did not know the one God? So the hadiths that came counter to that attitude were the following: one which says, go in search of knowledge, even if it means going to China. And another one, which probably is more relevant in the case of philosophy, which says, the word of wisdom is the lost property of the believer. Wherever they find it, they have a right to it. This is probably the most important hadith when it comes to a legitimation or a justification of being open to the wisdom of Greek people, although those Greek people, Aristotle or Plato or Plotinus, did not have a revelation and did not have a knowledge, maybe, of the one God of the monotheistic religion. So it can be said that Islamic philosophy has developed in the spirit of sayings like those. Now, in terms of content, consider the topic of universality. I will consider three figures of Islamic philosophy and the universal, starting with one of the very first Muslim philosophers, Abu Nasr al-Farabi, who just like in an assembly like ours, it is not necessary to remind us of the biographies of these people. Let me just remind us that Abu Nasr al-Farabi, as I call him, one of the very first true philosophers, not just a translator or a commentator, but someone who produced a system, died in 950. He was nicknamed the second master, the first master being obviously Aristotle. And the reason why I evoke him is that he is probably the first one to insist on a universalist perspective on the truth. I am here, of course, thinking of two major works by Al-Farabi. One is The Harmony of the Opinion of the Two Sages, the two sages in question being Aristotle and Plato. Because again, to come back to those who resisted the introduction of Islamic philosophy, of falsafa as it was known from the an Arabization of the Greek philosophia, they said, well, here you are, you philosophers talking about Plato or Aristotle, and you are talking about people who could not even agree among themselves. They would say Plato and Aristotle did not agree among themselves, and this is the kind of topic against which Al-Farabi has written this book on the harmony of the opinion of the two sages, where he tries to demonstrate that, yeah, in appearance they may be saying different things, but ultimately they agree on the nature, the universal nature of the truth. And the other work I have in mind is his most famous work on the perfect city, the perfect state, the state that he considered a virtuous city oriented towards happiness. And what I have in mind here is more precisely what he says on religion, on the fact that religion and philosophy share the same ultimate truth. This is truly what is at the heart of this title of a reinvention of universality from the perspective of Islamic philosophy, this affirmation that religion and philosophy share the same ultimate truth, that the divine varieties or the divine beings that can be grasped by human beings, or rather by the rational part of our soul as human beings, are one and the same. And when it comes to expressing those divine varieties or beings as religion, what we do is translate them in as religion. And Farabi, in his description of the perfect state, described the ruler of such a state, what he calls, the one he calls the first ruler, somehow the founder, the founding father of that perfect state, as a human who has precisely fully developed that rational part of our soul, our active intellect, to say it in the vocabulary of Aristotelism, and also of actually Neoplatonism. So this first ruler has both practical and theoretical knowledge, and that makes him a ruler precisely because he has this mastery of what Aristotle has called the architectonic science, which is politics. So religion has no claim to exclusive possession of truth, but is translation by the imaginative faculty of the ultimate truth. This view is important when it comes to understanding the perspective on universality as being this harmony between the truth of religion and the truth of reason or philosophy. An important quality of the prophet ruler or the first ruler seeking the happiness of his society is imagination. The imagination, literally the faculty of making images or translating into images the divine varieties. So that is what the highest faculty in us does. And as such, this faculty of translation, this imagination, belongs to the sphere of the dialectical and the rhetorical. Here, when he mentions the dialectical or when I mention the dialectical or the rhetorical, I am paraphrasing these Muslim philosophers, themselves paraphrasing Aristotle, who famously made a distinction between a demonstrative grasping of the truth or a dialectical or rhetorical approach of that same truth. Religion is on the side of a rhetorical or dialectical translation of what ultimately is grasped by the highest parts of our capacity to know, of our reason, which is grasping the eternal varieties. So I wanted to mention this about Al-Farabi to answer the question of this reinvention, to insist on this theme of the coincidence of prophecy and philosophy, and on the way in which this coincidence runs through the history of philosophy and Islam, and can be found in almost all Muslim philosophers, in authors such as Averroes, Ibn Rushd, or Ibn Tufayl, both of them now on the western side of the Muslim world, unlike Al-Farabi, both of them who died in the 12th century, and both of them died in Marrakesh, as you all know. Ibn Tufayl, who has been the mentor of Averroes. So I'll start with Ibn Tufayl and mention his beautiful philosophical novel titled Hayy ibn Yaqzan. And the importance of that novel cannot be stressed enough. Hayy ibn Yaqzan, which is a proper name, personal name, but means also the living son of the vigilant, represents, Hayy ibn Yaqzan represents the universal human, which is also at the heart of the universality in Islamic philosophy, also in Islamic mysticism. The universal human, the insan kamil, whom you find also in medieval religious traditions as in the Latin phrase homo perfectus. So this universal human and the universality of divine truth. Hayy ibn Yaqzan, very quickly, the novel, as you probably all know, is the novel. It is basically Robinson Crusoe, except that this is not the story of someone who was coming from a shipwreck, but a child who had, or Tarzan, if you prefer, someone who was abandoned in an island as a child, raised by a deer. And then the story is that this child is going to reinvent, so to say, to discover by himself everything that is constitutive of our humanity, the knowledge that is constitutive of our humanity, and also the capacity to rise to the intelligence of the one God, and to translate that knowledge of the one God into the proper rituals that express devotion and love for that highest one principle. So the story of Hayy ibn Yaqzan is the story of achieving humanity, is the story of this notion that to be a human is not a state, it is a task and a responsibility. To be human is to have to realize, to achieve our own humanity, to respond to the call of becoming fully insan kamil or homo perfectus, precisely. And the reason why I evoke this novel is obviously because it is, again, another illustration of this coincidence between religion and philosophy as manifested in Al-Farabi's philosophy, but it is also precisely a reflection on what pluralism, religious pluralism, could mean as precisely different translations of the same divine reality. When he understands the nature of the one God through his capacity to use his reason, Hayy ibn Yaqzan discovers at the same time that somehow the bodily spheres, the bodily planets, also have a certain knowledge of the one God. So from that idea, from that notion of a brotherhood between him and the stars, him and the planets, because we are in a Aristotelian Ptolemaic type of cosmology, obviously, here. And from that understanding, he understands that knowing the one God is not sufficient. If you know him, you have to love him. If you love him, you have to express it in some ways, in some rituals. And this is the discovery of religion, that it is not just a matter of theoretical knowledge of the one God, but also a way of turning that knowledge into practice and into a ritual. And we see in that novel that he is going to choose, obviously, a few rituals that are Islamic, circumambulation, imitating the planets, circling, going in circle, as the way in which these planets express their knowledge and love for the one God, leads him, that discovery leads him to the notion that he should have a ritual of circumambulation as a way of expressing himself, the love he has for the one God. And all the rituals are like that. Ablution, for example, the idea that you have to purify yourself and imitate as much as you can the absolute purity of these planets. Again, we are in an Aristotelian cosmology where it is believed that beyond the sky of the moon, everything above it is absolute perfection, and that the sublunar world is the world of imperfection, generation, and corruption, while everything above the sky of the moon is perfection and eternity. So how do you imitate these the perfection of the bodily planets? By cleaning yourself through ablution. So here we can see how he translates in his philosophical novel this Quranic verse that says, "Inna dina indallahi al-Islam," the religion agreeable to God is Islam. Here, a remark quickly in passing on the two meanings of the word Islam. There is one meaning, which is this primordial ontological relationship of the human to his or her Lord. So in that sense, Hayy ibn Yaqzan is discovering that Islam is the only relationship that the human being can have with their Lord. And this idea that the human being, when they understand fully who the one God is, have to embrace something called Islam, is Quranic. The Quran insists on the figure of Abraham as, in that sense, the real father of monotheism, Al-Hanif, as he is called in Islam, the one who refused all form of idol worshipping because he was open only open to the one God. So that would be Islam in this primordial ontological sense, explaining, by the way, why the Quran calls Muslim prophets that obviously were born before Islam appeared in 610. So that would be the second sense of the word Islam, the positive religion that appeared in 610, as opposed to the ontological, the primordial religion that defines the relationship between the Insan Kamil and his Lord, and which is expressed in the novel Hayy ibn Yaqzan. And at the end of the novel, there is an important point, which is the misunderstanding that Hayy ibn Yaqzan encounters. At first, he's very happy to discover a human society and to go to a place, to a city ruled by a leader called Salman, and where he sees other human beings. But then he will leave, because he will quickly encounter some misunderstanding from the inhabitants of that city, manifesting again the continuing contradiction between the closed and tribalist conception of religion and a universalist dynamic form that it takes in Hayy ibn Yaqzan, who decides then to go back to his solitude. What he has discovered is that the city he joined at one point have this closed understanding of religion, and not realizing that they had just a translation of a more universal form of truth. Okay, I will end very quickly now with the evocation of Ibn Rushd that I have mentioned, or Averroes, probably the best illustration of universality, as shown by, I want to quote here to cite not text, but a movie, a Bollywood movie that came out in 1997, the movie Destiny, by Egyptian director Youssef Chahine, a movie that had been celebrated in Cannes that same year, 1997, which is a mix of history and fiction about the life of Averroes, presenting him as both as a grand judge appointed by the Caliph, so that is his religious side, if you wish, and on the other hand, as a fatherly figure of a universal philosopher surrounded by loving disciples of different faiths and backgrounds, some of them having traveled from Christian France through the Pyrenees Mountains to Andalusia to seek enlightenment from his lectures on Aristotle's philosophy. And by the way, speaking of his commentary of Aristotle's philosophy, let us be reminded that he was called the commentator precisely by Thomas Aquinas. And to insist on this aspect of universality of philosophy, Thomas Aquinas would easily write against them Muslims, but at the same time, when he works in philosophy, he would be very respectful of this Muslim philosopher who was Averroes, that he called the commentator. And we are all, we recall all that before he was canonized by the church and became Saint Thomas Aquinas, he was first condemned. His theses were condemned because of the accusation of Averroism precisely. Which means, by the way, I always insist on this in my job as a teacher of philosophy, that we should get out of a unilinear way of looking at the history of philosophy as born out of Greek miracle, then went through antiquity in Europe, and then medieval time, and then et cetera, just the idea that philosophy is quintessentially European and Western is just absurd. Medieval philosophy shows us that you do not understand fully the history of philosophy if you do not put together these different braids of histories, the Muslim one, the Jewish one, and the Christian one. But one essential aspect of the teaching of Ibn Rushd is that truth cannot contradict itself, does not contradict itself. So if there is an appearance of contradiction between rational truth and revelation, this signals simply that revelation has to be interpreted. It seems to me that this thesis, which is at the core of Averroes' philosophy, is truly the best way of expressing this perspective on universality from the standpoint of Islamic philosophy. I end by evoking again this movie Destiny, which represents also this dialectics of openness and closedness that I have mentioned. When he presents Averroes as the target of a fanatical sect that forces the Sultan in Cordoba to send him into exile and have his books publicly burned. This is again that tribal side of the Islamic faith. Eventually, this Bollywood movie has a happy ending, as its final image is that of a triumphant Averroes defiantly throwing one of his own manuscripts into the fire, knowing that his works have safely traveled east and found refuge in Egypt. And the image of that defiant Averroes is accompanied by the following words: "Thoughts have wings, no one can prevent them from flying." The meaning of such a praise of the figure of the Muslim philosopher is obvious. Yusuf Shaheen is talking in 1997 about our own times and reminding Muslim societies of today of the universality of the word of wisdom, to allude again to the prophetic saying I quoted in the beginning, which means openness, free questioning, free thinking, and the true spirit of ijtihad, this effort of interpretation that is so much needed today in Muslim societies. And it is a good thing that today, following a decision by Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, that country has reconnected officially with the universality of the word of wisdom by allowing a teaching of philosophy, whereas it was not even allowing the teaching of theology, finding that theology already was in the very spirit of openness. I thank you very much for your attention, and hopefully my lecture was well served by technology.
So thank you very much, Professor Diagne, for guiding us through the history of philosophy, starting with the Quranic and even the pre-Quranic time of Islam, and then going through three figures, three persons of Islamic philosophy. Listening to you, I just underline that it's really worth to read your books, because you're not only talking about philosophy and all those history of science, but you're all, as you demonstrated, you have a great knowledge, a big knowledge of films and literature too. And for example, in the book on translation, you have a longer passage on the arrival on a science fiction film, which is quite enlightening. So thank you very much, and recommendation to everyone here in St. Georgen. Okay, there is the first question in the public. Michaela.
Klaus Neulinger from the University of Innsbruck. Thank you very much for your talk. I'm talking tomorrow, and it seems we don't know each other, but it fits perfectly together. We'll see tomorrow. I will talk about prophets and imagination as well. So my question is on imagination and on Al-Farabi. I'm wondering, Do you see there is a tension between what Al-Farabi writes in The Virtuous City and in the aphorisms? Because you're very much focused on the unity of philosophy and religion and both coming together. And when I remember the selected aphorisms, he's more and more moving a little bit towards focusing on religion and the importance of the imaginative faculty being the essential faculty of the prophets, and drawing a distinction between philosophy and religion in the end. But I'm not sure about this, so I'm wondering how you see this.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. And I'm happy to know that there will be a convergence between our two presentations on that aspect. And you are absolutely right raising that question, because in a way, when we take the picture of these divine varieties that are grasped by the intellect once it is active intellect, and then translated by the imagination into a discourse that the people can hear, I skipped an aspect, which is that actually the divine varieties can project themselves directly on the imagination, not necessarily going through the rational faculty and then translated by the imagination, but they become somehow images directly. So the most important faculty in a prophet, so to say, would be to have a very intense imagination, as you implied in your question, and which is absolutely right. There is this aspect also that you find in that in that. And if you insist on that, you will be more insisting on this prophetic form of illumination rather than the rationalist, the more rationalist side that is Averroes. So yeah, speaking about, you are absolutely right mentioning a tension, a possible tension between these two ways for the divine varieties to reach the human being, or the perfect human being, obviously, directly through their imagination. And this is something we find in the whole history of philosophy. Spinoza mentions also the importance of imagination and justifying actually his attraction to Christianity by the fact that he thinks that God has spoken in Christianity bush a bush, from mouth to mouth, which is in a more direct way. This direct capacity of the prophet to receive revelation through their imagination rather than first being filtered through their rational capacity is something very important. And thank you very much for mentioning it.
Thank you, Mr. Diagne, for this really splendid presentation. Kann man es hören? Ja. Can you understand, or is it? I'm close enough. I'm close enough.
Yes.
Okay. You drew a very, very dark picture of tribes. Does this picture refer to the tribes on the Arabic Peninsula, or also to tribes in Southeast Asia, or in the Amazonia, or in the Polar Circle? Is it a kind of parable that religions use in order to present themselves as the better kind of religion? So world religions have this maneuver to present themselves in bright colors by drawing the tribes very, very dark, and to present themselves as the real, rational, primordial relation to God and world, whereas the tribes, they are still in closed in their jungle or in their desert. I suspect there is a kind of arrogance of the major religions to redefine tribes. And as a concrete question, is Shia, the first tribal offspring of Islam?
Well, thank you. This is a very important question. Let me say this. I have truly, and that is full disclosure, I have this kind of Bergsonian conception of the tribe, and as one primal form of organization of the human beings, and then this idea of a movement towards the open society, towards humanity. And basically, this is at the center of my own work when I'm not dealing with Islamic philosophy. For example, in his generous presentation of my works, Professor Specker mentioned my book on universalizing the travail, the creative work of humanity. But I think that this could be said about tribes. By nature, in a way, a tribe is self-enclosed. That is what defines it. And independently from any kind of value judgment of the value of it, what defines a tribe is precisely this way of being self-enclosed. And it can be something truly, truly bad, because by definition, another tribe is, by just its very existence, a threat to my own existence too. Even before enmity coming up or any problem coming up, the definition of a tribe is that, yes, a tribe easily is opposed to another tribe because there is no conception of a shared humanity between the two. When Bergson described tribes that way, he says that as soon as a war happens, war doesn't have necessarily to happen, but when it happens, then, and he quotes here Shakespeare saying, fair is foul and foul is fair. In other words, a tribe would be thinking of pursuing the extermination of another tribe, again, because tribalism doesn't allow for any conception of a shared humanity. So this is the extreme way of looking at tribe. I confess it to you. But let's look at our modern tribalisms that as we have them. For example, the tribalism of the extreme right in France, Le Pen, not the daughter, but the father. The father who famously said once, I prefer my daughters to my nieces to my cousins to my aunts, etc., having this sense of expanding the tribe through concentric circles, so to say. Well, and it is obvious that before that circle passes the borders of France, the capacity to love has been exhausted already. I don't see him going with that, those concentric circles. And it is in the logic of tribe to function that way. What opens these circles of connection against? So even if, and so the picture doesn't need to be dark. One does not say to say that tribes are necessarily bad or at war or destructive, etc., etc. It is just that by nature, a tribe has borders, is self-enclosed, while what is called société ouverte has no borders. Now, the weakness of that openness is that there is no instinct corresponding to it. I do not have to question the reason why I would love my daughters more than my nieces, more than etc., as Jean-Marie Le Pen puts it. It's just there as an instinct, just the way animals, a mother lion becomes terrible if she feels that you are threatening their children. Opposing that to the open society means that in situations such as the one encountered by these young generation, it is not true that anything goes, that fair is foul and foul is fair, to quote again Shakespeare. They had a sense of a type of justice that goes beyond tribal law. You can have chivalry in a tribe, and for example, forgiving your enemy, not killing them, etc., etc. But again, in the name of what do you do it? Having a sense of humanity as a principle of action, as a regulative principle, to speak the language of Kant, is something different from a tribal approach to who we are as human beings. But yes, thank you for calling my attention to the fact that the narrative of the dawn of Islam, you can see how the situation is described in very dark terms. Usually people who talk about that talk about the fact that women was so worthless in tribal societies, that they were sometimes they were buried at birth or things like that. You can see here how the religious narrative functions, painting in black, in darkness, what was before, to emphasize your own down as light, these binary oppositions between Jahiliyyah and knowledge, etc., which is the way in which actually all fanaticism function, by painting in dark everything that is not their own interpretation of the religion. But again, if we look at tribe versus humanity as metaphysical categories, the way in which Bergson does it, yes, considering humanity as an ethical principle, as something that is at the principle of action, you cannot do that as a tribe.
Thank you, Professor Diagne, for your splendid explanations and explorations. Uta Andre, my name. I come from a Protestant church in northern Germany, and my question goes along with what our brother asked, and partly you touched what I expect as an answer. But I wonder, you said that there is a dialectic between the tribalism and the universalism, and I found that very sympathetic and very real, because we see in our days today so that universalism is so much limited because the human being is not able to assume this. We need a personal belief, not only a belief system, and we need something that closes and binds us, like identity, and in the same time we have this great idea of human rights and universalism and truth and all this. But it doesn't help if philosophers come to that script of humanity, but it is not something that we can practice in reality, because we are all human beings with our limitations.
Indeed, you are absolutely right. And usually when I talk about universalism or humanity as a principle of action, as I did in my book on Universaliser, the practice of universality remains still our duty. In other words, what is the alternative? The alternative would be to just say, well, it is what it is. Our fragmentation by our identities is inevitable, unavoidable, because that is just the nature of things. And homo homini lupus. And here we go. Violence is inscribed in who we are. We are wolves to one another. So the current fragmentation and this enclosure in our identities is something inevitable. Or we understand this duty of hope, which, by the way, as religious people, I believe that many of us, probably most of us, would identify with that that aspect. Yes, humanity as such has a meaning, as a principle. There is this the idea that we have to achieve humanity, that humanity is a responsibility, a task for us to achieve, and that we achieve that in reciprocity and in relationship to one another, is something that we can actually fight for, even given all the obstacles that we are living in. One such obstacle, and I come back to the presentation of my work that was so generously made by Professor Specker, the so-called post-colonial or decolonial thought, where there is a kind of opposition in principle to any idea of universal, saying that if you say universal, you are actually buying into something that is Europeocentric and imperial and colonial. The universal is colonial, etc. This idea of universalizing, choosing a verb instead of a substantive, and saying that there is a practice of universality which is a call for action, actually, against all the tribalism, against this idea that our identities make us prisoner of our tribes again, because here we are creating tribes in this 21st century. I'm not talking now about what idea we would have of the tribes in pre-Islamic Arabia or not. I'm talking about the tribes that we are creating today in this insistence on our identities. We have the rebirth of all form of white supremacies, and we have on the right and the extreme right side, and on the so-called left, we have also this insistence on identities and refusal of anything beyond identities, a refusal of universalism or humanity as colonial or imperial. That is something we should be speaking against. So there is something to be done, and that something is being done, would be done in the name of humanity as a principle of action. And if you want something more empirical, more precise, actually the challenges we are facing command in a way that we come together as one humanity. We would agree, maybe not in my country of United States these days, but we should be agreeing that against the environmental challenge, we have to come together as one single humanity. And the COVID that just ended, hopefully it has ended, reminds us that also when we are confronted with these kind of sanitary challenges, we cannot have another response than a response as one humanity. We have, as one humanity, become a danger to ourselves. The Anthropocene means just that we are now a force, a geological force of the kind that made the dinosaurs disappear, except that now we are the dinosaurs. So yes, there are obvious empirical reasons to think in terms of one humanity, and I believe that philosophically there is a foundation also for such a principle of humanity.
So thank you, Professor Diagne. I would take the two questions together of the two Islamic professors from Hamburg and Frankfurt, and then if no one is suffering too much, we close the discussion.
Yes, thank you very much for the fascinating talk. My name is Mira Sievers. I'm the Hamburg one of the two. Yeah, I found it very convincing and interesting how you try to show that Islamic philosophers who really speak in favor of universalism have something within the Islamic religion in their back, something that supports them. But nowadays, we sometimes see that religious identity or the identity of a religious community can also run against universalist claims. So I'm asking about modern day tribalisms, as you said. Is there an argument which one can develop against such modern day tribalist religious ideas? And if you say that tribalism it has to do with instincts, do we have a big problem because people like Mr. Le Pen somehow have a more natural view? So is it does it take more intellectual work in order to counter it?
One moment, let's take Rana Asufi.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I enjoyed it. I wish that you didn't stop it, but I can understand. I come from an Islamic theology, Islamic jurisprudence background, and you've mentioned all these wonderful philosophers and the theologians who were devoted to the study or to the scientific study of theology and philosophy, who were not part of the pre-modern caliphate monopoly, if I may say this. So they were like people, scholars who devote their time to the study of philosophy and theology. And you've mentioned a name that of a modern future king, the Prince Mohammed bin Souleymane, and you said he's opening now the door for philosophy. So I was just wondering if you're optimistic that philosophy is being now introduced, and finally also theology instead of Wahhabism. Do you think for somebody like this person, this figure, and the establishment that stands behind him, and I don't want to get into politics, but I was just wondering if philosophy is being taken as a now I can't call the word in English, like Schmuck in German. It's like something you use it to just say, oh, now we are open, we're doing philosophy. We're actually a member of this universal world. But we know everything what's happening there, and we know this person, what he did. So I was just wondering, are we misusing philosophy and not, or they, I think we're not misusing philosophy, and they are trying actually just to use it as a facade, but behind it, it's the same tribal, very corrupt world, if I might say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues, for those questions. Let me try to say something about, an aspect of what the first question said is it seemed important to me, yes, to insist on the fact that these philosophers, when they deal with universality, are also inscribed in a religion which has this universalist aim. That's one thing. Second aspect of your question, yes, there is an instinct of tribe again, and humanity doesn't have anything like that, because precisely it doesn't function with instinct. What gives us a sense of it is, yes, we can have philosophical reasons to believe in the existence of humanity. You find today in our new tribalism philosophical positions against that. We live in a time when someone has written a book titled Against Empathy. This is extraordinary. You would ask yourself, how can we write against empathy, but that book exists? In 2016, this author, psychologist Paul Bloom, wrote a book against empathy. The most important aspect is not that he just wrote that book, but it is actually being used seriously and politically to say things that go in the sense of fragmentation of our humanity. affirming somehow identitarisms that become true tribalism. There is a famous billionaire who declared that empathy is the weakness of Western civilization, basically wanting Western civilization to have this tribalist attitude of self-extolling and so on, so forth. So yes, it is true that that is the kind of world in which we are living. And but again, that is why universalism and devoting our reflection to universalism, as our conference around Nostra Aetate is doing, actually is important. So thank you for that. About philosophy being now introduced in Saudi Arabia, I mean, it was just a royal fiat to say yes. So obviously you could think that this could be a facade, because for so long you would not have a teaching, not of philosophy, and the teaching philosophy in the Islamic world was a question, but you would not even have a teaching of kalam, of theology, because kalam seemed too rationalist and, questioning things and making use of skepticism, which is the basis of philosophical attitude, would encounter the saying according to which manta kata zandaka, if you start reasoning and producing rational arguments, you inevitably fall into disbelief and so on and so forth, forgetting the lessons of someone like Ghazali, who say that if you do not doubt, you do not examine, and if you do not examine, you do not truly believe. So that spirit could be brought back by this decision. It might be, I don't know what the motivations of that this decision are, and we should not be also seeing too much in it, as there is still an opposition to that. I was told, because my surprise came the day I was invited to a conference in philosophy in Saudi Arabia. I could not believe it, and I just thought that this was a mistake, and I found out that it was not. There was this decision made, and very recently I belong to this FISP, Federation, International Federation of Philosophical Societies, which held a meeting in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia wants to organize the World Congress of Philosophy in the near future. But, and this but goes in the direction of what you said, I understand that there is a tension between the Ministry of Education in Saudi Arabia, who doesn't want to see that, and the Ministry of Culture. Paradoxically, the teaching of philosophy and all these philosophical activities are now devoted to the Ministry of Culture and not the Ministry of Education, where the resistance are very, very, very strong. So, not to be too optimistic, but understand that once philosophy sets foot in some place, then it is going to produce its effects. And as in the movie, Youssef Chahine make Averroes say, thoughts have wings and no one can prevent them from flying. So teaching the religion as the intellectual and spiritual and open tradition that it is very important, and that makes the teaching of philosophy and the discussion, philosophical discussion, all the more important. So thank you so very much all for your comments and questions.
So thank you very much, Professor Diagne. Before closing the section with a moment of music again, we just want to thank you again for this very inspiring talk and this wonderful discussion you had. I think you were really present although please feel invited. So Cambridge, it's a nice university, but please come to St. Georgen. We have the same teacher-student relation in numbers like Cambridge. So small groups, very good discussion. So please feel invited to come to Frankfurt, to visit St. Georgen, to visit the wonderful Islamic department at the State University, and have a nice evening in Cambridge.
Thank you very much. It will be with great pleasure, really. Thank you for your hospitality and your warm welcome all.
Ja, ich darf Sie noch auf eine Sache hinweisen, wenn Sie morgen hoffentlich weiter hier sind, haben Sie die Möglichkeit, oder nicht nur die Möglichkeit, sondern die herzliche Einladung, wie man katholisch sagt, also bitte tun Sie das, sich einzutragen in die Workshop-Listen, dass wir ungefähr eine Idee haben, wie viel Sie ausgelastet sind. Wir gehen davon aus, dass Pater Jean-Luc online da sein wird. Beim Vortrag sind wir uns sicher. Bei dem Workshop sind wir uns einigermaßen sicher, also nur Mut und Hoffnung in die geistigen Fähigkeiten haben wir ja gerade gehört. Das war, glaube ich, das, was ich heute zu sagen habe. Nach dem Musikstück eine herzliche Einladung, kleinen Moment zu warten und dann wird es einen Empfang geben mit Getränken und einem kleinen Imbiss. Und jetzt noch eine herzliche Einladung und herzlichen Dank an Herrn Felix Gerstner zur Gestaltung des Endes.